The Incredibles is, at the time I'm writing this, Pixar's greatest film. This movie was released in 2004, but its themes have only resonated more and more with me as I've gotten older, and I predict this movie will only grow more relatable as time goes on. The writers didn't intend it, but I can't help thinking this movie was made for our time, because of how emblematic it is of the Third Industrial Revolution's progression. Within the 20 years between now and this movie's production, social media has grown exponentially, we're super lonely, the political climate is bonkers, a lot of people can't find jobs or housing, and we're approaching the dawn of revolutionary AI progress. But what does The Incredibles have to do with all of that? The danger of isolation is the theme of The Incredibles, which is perfect because Gen Z has been said to be one of the loneliest generations. They're less hopeful in building a family because it's too expensive, they can't afford a house to raise said family, and even with their existing families, they've had relationships damaged because of the political divide. It's not novel to say that social media is making our generation more lonely, but what's different about 2025 is the dead internet theory. It's estimated that over half of the internet is robots. Instagram now has AI accounts you can talk with, and there's even an app called Replica, which uses your texting patterns to create a perfect best friend for you. We're approaching a time where it's getting harder and harder to tell apart robot from human in online spaces. And for a lot of people, it might just be easier to find connection with a moldable companion rather than having to be patient and putting up with us dingbats. And if that makes you squeamish, you're not alone. My prediction is that our mistrust in institutions, outrage culture, mass advertising, combined with the clutter and slop of online spaces, will lead Gen Z, or perhaps future generations, to retreat into something else: Transcendentalism. Transcendentalism is a 19th century movement that contemplates the goodness of nature, freedom, and most importantly, self-reliance. And one of the most influential transcendentalists was Henry David Thoreau. And one of the most influential pieces of work by this influential transcendentalist was Civil Disobedience, an essay that even inspired the great Martin Luther King Jr. Thoreau was inspired to write this essay in the midst of Manifest Destiny. As the United States was kidnapping slaves, committing a genocide against indigenous peoples, and annexing land from Mexico, Thoreau already knew this was a great evil and wanted nothing to do with it. So he stopped paying the poll tax, which President Polk was using to fund said Mexican-American War. And as a result, he was thrown in prison for tax evasion. Thoreau writes,
"Under a government which imprisons unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison."
Thoreau was released when a fellow citizen paid the tax for him, which he hated because that kind of defeated the point. But he went on to write about how everyone has a duty to do no harm to their fellow man, even if the government commands them to do otherwise.
"If it requires you to be an agent of injustice to another, then I say, break the law."
Are you saying we shouldn't help our customers?
The law requires that I answer no.
So what is Mr. Thoreau's answer then to a state that robs citizens of its freedom and is on its way to becoming an even worse dystopian nightmare?
You're living in a van down by the river!
Yes, Thoreau understood that fighting injustice would come at a cost. In his case, his freedom and finances, but also his potential family's well-being. So the answer is to own less stuff so the government can't hold much against you. Thoreau never married or fathered any children, although I'm not sure if it was for that reason or if he just preferred to be single, either which is perfectly respectable. Nature is important to transcendentalists because they believe nature had a divinity to it, and one needed to get away from society to find their true identity. This movement is why in a lot of stories written around this era, the character needs to retreat into nature to begin their journey. Hester Prynne gets exiled to the woods, Ishmael goes out to the ocean, etc. And Mr. Incredible needs to go to Nomonison Island. Thoreau called his readers to go against the mold, even though he knew most people wouldn't because the cost was too great. But he predicted that there would be some exceptional people who would stand their ground and would suffer for it.
A very few, as heroes, patriots, martyrs, reformers, in the great sense, serve the state with their conscience also, and so necessarily resist it for the most part, and they are commonly treated as enemies by it.
Oh no, that ain't right!
This is the predicament Mr. Incredible finds himself in. He's more than comfortable supporting the police and government when he's encouraged to perform public acts of service, but he has a harder time obeying once it tests his moral conscience. and as a result, Mr. Incredible is unjustly prisoned, even if that prison is non-literal. When Mr. Incredible returns to quote-unquote superhero work on Syndrome's Island, it's not the same because he's not saving a person. He's under the belief that he's helping control a government robot, and, as Thoreau predicted, unyielding alliance to the state leads to comfort and riches at the cost of authentic living. So like Mr. Incredible, I could see Gen Z becoming attracted to Thoreau's philosophy. But The Incredibles is not without their critiques of Transcendentalism, because the superheroes are kind of both the citizen and the state. In the first act, the people realize that their reliance on the superheroes is costing them their autonomy, even if that means their right to self-destruction. And in order to be free, those in power need to back off. Or, as Thoreau said,
that government is best which governs least. The government must have the sanction and consent of the governed. It can have no pure right over my person and property, but what I concede to it.
Although The Incredibles encourages individual identity and self-reflection, and even cautions against the attempts to suppress that, The Incredibles has a lot to say about the danger of self-reliance. The words that begin Syndrome's descent into villainy are,
My home, buddy. I work alone.
It tore me apart. But I learned an important lesson. You can't count on anyone, especially your hero.
Syndrome thinks that this is his departure away from Mr. Incredible, but it's actually mimicry. Syndrome is still very much Incrediboy. Now granted, even though Syndrome is self-sufficient and lives on an island, that doesn't make him the ideal transcendentalist. He's deeply entrenched with empowering foreign governments and reaps a lot of wealth from that, which I think Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson would despise. And even worse, he's a massive jerk. But that's the tug and pull that this film has with Transcendentalism. Another way The Incredibles cautions against isolation is through the setting. Not only is Syndrome's island literally called No Man is an Island, which many people have already pointed out, but even look at the background throughout the rest of the movie. The superheroes thrive in the city, where everything is so close together they can move from one disaster to the next to fix. It's crowded, but not confined. Then they're thrusted into the suburbs, which is a great way to represent loneliness, since the suburbs don't have these community hotspots the same way a city does, but at the same time, it's lacking the intimacy of a rural village. And at the end of the movie, they're back in the city. But for Mr. Incredible and for Gen Z, they need to do more than just go have a family in an attempt to fix loneliness. One needs to make sure they are actually present with said family, and in touch with each other's goals and aspirations. Otherwise, they're just going to be lonely together. In his 1931 book, The Epic of America, James Truslow Adams defined the American dream as
that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. It is not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable, and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position.
Mr. Incredible seems to embody the more original idea of the American dream that Adams speaks of. That is, not having your work inhibited by social or financial barriers, and working to improve society so that everyone else can do that too. This quote has certainly been lost in translation in our year 2025, and now the American dream just kinda comes down to work hard and you'll make enough money. Regardless, Mr. Incredible's American dream dies in the suburbs, which is ironically often used to represent the success of the American dream. Mr. Incredible is not able to attain the fullest stature of his capabilities, but he's also not allowed to work towards improving society or help his fellow neighbor, something that gave him fulfillment and purpose in the glory days. Gen Z is in the same predicament. As employment changes, more young folks feel like getting a college degree is non-negotiable, even if they're not passionate about academia. Every so often, students are told this one major or field of study will secure them work, and then they're told later that there's too many people in that market and they need to do even more to stand out, or it's getting replaced by AI. Except, we see the new American dream, the work hard, get rich American dream, float to the surface again once Mr. Incredible gets caught up in Syndrome's trap. Syndrome embodies the current understanding of the American dream pretty darn well. After all, Syndrome starts as an underdog, but becomes a self-made genius who plans on redistributing power to the masses.
Because I don't have powers, isn't it? Well, not every superhero has powers, you know. You can be super without them. I invented these. I can fly. Can you fly? And I did it without your precious gifts, your oh-so-special powers.
And based on what I've been reading on certain Reddit threads and YouTube comments, there's some people who sympathize with Syndrome and feel like The Incredibles has a bad message, which is that some people got it and some people don't, and if that makes you upset, then too bad. But I think Syndrome's character dismantles a lot of the speculation that this film is pro-meritocracy or supports objectivism. The pursuit of excellence at the cost of oppression and harm to others is shown to be devastating. Syndrome's empire capitalizes off the deaths of other talented individuals, and he's not really fighting for equality since it's still most important that he remains on top of the food chain at the end of the day.
I save the best inventions for myself.
He has the American part, but not the dream. Not the goal of improving the system for others until he's had his fill. He's super, but not a hero. And I think it's worth noting that his idea of improving said system is just giving everyone else superpowers without any safeguards or considering if they even want it, especially since the last consensus society made was to not have any superheroes at all. For both Syndrome and Mr. Incredible, there's this underlying failure to separate their sense of worth from their power.
He's attracted to power. So am I. It's a weakness we share.
You always say be true to yourself, but you never say which part of yourself to be true to.
Syndrome represents a lot of the problems that our generation is facing, like the fear of powerful elites and institutions hoarding the benefits of AI for themselves, the threat of nuclear war, but his problems originate with a lack of identity.
You're that kid from the fan club. Brody, buddy!
My name is Incrediboy.
Buddy?
My name is not Buddy!
Even his name, Syndrome, suggests that he's more than just a person. He's a mentality. A contagious mentality that we're more vulnerable to than we think. Because Gen Z is told to emulate so many things. And like every new generation, they're compared to their predecessors and told that they should go back to playing outside and solving world wars instead of doing silly TikTok dances. And then there's mass advertising. Advertising is at its worst and will continue to get worse. Gen Z can't find their desires as authentically as past generations because they're told what they should want. Constantly. Over and over again. But the standard of a successful person now is so different from what it used to be too. A long time ago, I think people were more content with not being famous because it appeared out of reach to most people. But with TikTok and other platforms, plenty more people can become famous if they have a phone. So now more young folks have to ask themselves if that's something they want. And some people have likely already figured out the science behind this, and they become political commentators to repeat beliefs they don't fully believe in, or they represent their life in unrealistic ways with the intent of generating jealousy in other people. So like Syndrome, the goal is fame for fame's sake. And speaking of fake,
I've got to warn you. It's a learning robot. Every moment you spend fighting it only increases its knowledge of how to beat you.
The Incredibles in 2025 is a story about Mr. Incredible, an artist-writer on Instagram fighting against an evil ChatGPT monster threatening to take his job. I do think The Incredibles is a Frankenstein-esque story about the threat of AI and how it could empower bad guys, overshadow artists, breed mediocrity, but it does go deeper than that. Not only because The Incredibles actually shows what drove us to order society as we do, but also because the film offers some solutions. First, the rogue robot story is told to us plainly by Mirage.
Enables it to solve any problem it's confronted with, and unfortunately,
Let me guess. It got smart enough to wonder why it had to take orders.
we lost control, and now it's loose in the jungle, threatening our facility.
But it's also a lie. Bob was sold the story of the rogue robot by the people trying to pull the rug underneath him. The entire time, the robot was under someone's control. Granted, The Incredibles still is a rogue robot story because Syndrome is destroyed by his creation at the end of the movie. A lot of people are understandably skeptical of AI, so they boycott it or they try to discourage other people from using it. And the problem with this is that while they're avoiding it, the bad guys are embracing it. And if good people aren't the ones to safeguard it, that only leaves bad people freedom to do whatever they want with it. Likewise, the Incredibles can't defeat the robot without learning about it.
Can't stop it. The only thing hard enough to penetrate it is itself.
For most of us, AI is going to become part of our jobs. But the film gives us hope that we can overcome negative impacts of AI through collaboration. But let's be clear, technology is not a bad thing in The Incredibles. The Incredibles mirrors the reality of the real world, the age-old truth that technology will just amplify the goals of whoever uses it, whether for evil or for good. Gen Z can yearn for a life pre-AI and other technologies all they want, but there is no going back. Another weakness of our main character is being stuck in the past.
Living the glory days is better than acting like they didn't happen.
Yes, they happened. But this, our family, is what's happening now, Bob.
Never look back, darling. It distracts from the now.
This is the value of Edna as a character, who to me is like a would-be Syndrome if he was actually benevolent and had more confidence in himself. Because like Syndrome, Edna is tech-savvy, lives alone, and has a deep admiration for the supers. But instead of letting this admiration breed envy and discontentment, she finds inspiration and hones her own craft. It's her technology that saves Mr. Incredible's life, helps Elastigirl reconnect with her abilities, and ultimately brings the family together. So even though you'll have to make compromises between life's demands and your desires, don't forget who you are. Remember that you have gifts, skills, and an experience that is unique to you. It's worth it to touch grass, take a break from the internet, and reflect on why you live your life the way you do. But also don't forget about your fellow man or woman. Share your gifts with others, volunteer, hang out with your friends and family. Love, deeply, authentically, and powerfully.